begin, sir.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the board. My name is Nick Mancini, and I'm here to give you more of an in-depth perspective from a victim of a drunk driving incident. You've heard a lot of synopsis of statistics and empirical evidence. Allow me to give you my perspective. On July 15, 2012, I was a victim of a violent drunk driving accident. The circumstances and variables of said accident were very much in favor of either severe injury or death. Fortunately, I was also granted an extraordinary amount of luck as I survived the accident relatively unscathed, considering the potential harm it would cause. I sustained 2 pelvic fractures, one on the left and one on the right side. The left side impact was critical enough to break my leg out of its socket. 4 broken ribs, a laceration of my liver, a concussion powerful enough to make me forget the accident on the scene itself, and not to mention several bruises all around. At first glance, this may seem horrific, but given the circumstances I sustained, surprisingly little injury. Not many people can walk away from being ripped out of a mangled car wreck from the jaws of life, as if trying to uncrumble a sheet of paper. There were 2 factors that played a major role in my safety. First, I was asleep, which means my body didn't react so harshly and intensely to the accident, and definitely softened the blow. But this was an unplanned happenstance that I'm grateful for. Second, and by far the most importantly, I wore my seatbelt, which prevented me from traveling between 60 to 80 miles per hour into the front seats and potentially out of the car itself. The key ingredient to which I owe my life was my decision to wear a seatbelt. It's a tested method designed to provide safety from the jarring impact of an accident while being minimalistic and as comfortable as possible. Time and time again, through arguments of personal testimony to empirical evidence tested through trial, seatbelts have solidified themselves as a modern means of safety in a vehicle. Not only does it save you from being slingshot into your steering wheel or flung straight through your glass windshield, but when dealing with the backseat, it prevents your body from becoming a potentially hazardous projectile to the people in front of you. Had I not been buckled down, I'm quite certain my friends in the front seat would have sustained much more serious injury from having a 180-pound object at them flying from behind them at a high rate of speed. Before I begin the next section on addressing the arguments of personal choice, let me indulge you a bit into my psyche. I take great pride in my skepticism amongst all aspects of life. Nearly all the information that I take in is absorbed within the idea that this new data should be tested and analyzed before I spout fallacies to myself or anyone else. This same train of thought took place on every account prior to my accident. I am not a physical risk taker, so naturally I wouldn't debate with myself on whether or not I'd wear my seatbelt. But initially I felt that it should be the choice of the individual. Even after my accident, I still hung on to that belief. But upon further personal quandary, I've come to the conclusion that, at least under the authority of the state government, that wearing a seatbelt be a mandatory step in operating a motor vehicle. And let me address the reason. Unlike many means of personal freedom, there isn't much consequence to wearing a seatbelt. Some people may find it uncomfortable to wear. Some people may just not use it because some may just not be used to the concept, or in rare cases, some people are either adrenaline junkies or rebellious. This morning, I briefly listened to the 6:30 WPRO radio station during Gene Valicenti's broadcast, and he had on air the Attorney General, Peter Kilmartin, speaking on behalf of his positions on texting while driving and gun ownership, to which he gave immediate answers on his beliefs, which I find a highly valuable sign of personal integrity. He described either himself or someone else he knew as growing up at a time where seatbelts were a new thing. Not all cars had seatbelts, and they were capable of they were certainly not enforced as a mandatory safety aspect. So he or his example is not used to the concept of wearing a seatbelt. It is important that he mentioned and related this advocacy against texting while driving and wearing a seatbelt because it sparked a light bulb in my head. That's the next step in educational safety of motor vehicle operation, and it's making its way up in importance on par with not driving while intoxicated, not driving in the dark without your headlights on, or wearing a safety belt. You don't see many arguing the idea of freedom of DWI, because the consequences far outweigh the potential benefits, so much so that it's become outlawed. You also see the same thing for driving without your headlights, though not nearly as often or as vigorously, because it's a visual impairment on anyone, intoxicated or not, to to keep your lights off while driving at night, especially if you live where I do in Scituate. Driving without your headlights on Route 116 in the dark of night is practically suicidal. Now let's take that logic and bring it to seatbelts. The benefits of wearing a seatbelt greatly outweigh the risks or issues. The idea of whether or not someone feels discomfort while wearing their seatbelt does not conflate to the gravity of the consequences of an accident. Think of it this way. What are the potential consequences of an accident with or without a seatbelt? Let's say you're on your own. You may sustain injuries from minor to fatal. With injuries comes hospital bills if you receive medical attention. With injuries and hospital visits come worried friends and family. With that anxiety comes a permanent scar forever attached to your name. Injuries are a result of your accident, which has also damaged your car and or government or someone else's property. You may need to pay for roadside assistance, and either you or your local government needs to pay for repairs on the infrastructure of state or individual property. Perhaps your car is damaged beyond easy repair. It may cost far beyond the car's current worth on the market to fix. Now you're potentially without your own means of transportation, and I could go on and on. Consider these consequences as a result of an accident. And this is not just the only instance where an accident comes into play. It's also not even the possible extent of the results. Much of the emotional trauma, physical trauma, and fiscal trauma are supported on the balance of whether or not you wear a safety belt. Now, in the same process, let's analyze the risk of wearing a seatbelt and address the reasonings why they're incomparable to not wearing one. You have personal discomfort. Maybe it's too tight. Maybe you don't like how it feels. Maybe it gives you some irritation on the skin, etc. But my rebuttal to that is, there are ways to avoid these issues. There are products designed to further diminish the potential discomfort of wearing a safety belt. Ignoring your resources is no excuse for jeopardizing your safety or the safety belt. Unfamiliarity, maybe you're not used to it, maybe it's out of your generation yet. Consider doing some research online to detect potential seatbelt benefits. Visit your local library for books on seatbelt safety, or get some personal testimony from someone you know. Again, ignorance and lack of effort is no excuse. And then the grand one, the virtues of personal freedom. You don't believe your government has the right to tell you what you can or can't do. Well, you're also allowed to steal, drive. You're also not allowed to steal, drive while intoxicated, violently attack someone without probable cause, evade your taxes, sexually harass your coworkers, etc. Personally, I don't see the integrity behind not wearing a seatbelt any more than I see integrity in evading your taxes or harassing others. There are ways in which your peers are also affected by your decision to wear a seatbelt. As much as I advocate for certain personal freedoms, the consequences in this case far outweigh the benefits. And I could go on and on with examples and refutations, but I sincerely hope you see where I'm coming from and what I'm getting. The concepts of personal...
Somebody have a question?
Oh, sorry about that. The concepts of personal freedom, while under particular conditions, are within certain boundaries. Are important and should be discussed. In our eyes, this issue does not have any reasonable personal gain other than one's own fulfillment of the desire of independence or personal comfort. Both of those aspects of personal freedom do not equate to the benefits of wearing a seatbelt. All we're asking here is for enforcement and education. The reality is that not everybody will wear their seatbelts, no matter the stimuli or prodding they receive to do so. But those people are either unaware or willfully ignorant of the consequences. I believe the local government should enforce this policy of mandatory wearing of seatbelts, with the gravity of each offense increasing within a certain amount of time. Either the driver or any of his passengers choose to not wear a seatbelt. Also, the promotion of further education of the importance of seatbelt should continue to be stressed in life, whether from parent to child, teacher to student, officer to offender, etc. As a survivor of an accident where my life could have easily been compromised had it not been for my seatbelt, I'm living proof that seatbelts save your own life as well as the lives of others. Please consider this analysis and testimony going forth with the seatbelt.
Are there any questions or comments? Senator Lombardi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Earlier I had made reference to a bright young man, and this is the bright young man that I was talking about. I have the distinct privilege of being Nick's lawyer. And Nick, ladies and gentlemen, if you could believe this, Nick actually underestimated the circumstances of this accident and underestimated not only the impact, but the effect that it had on Nick. And basically the vehicle was in Nick's back when he was struck, when this happened. And I, being a lifelong friend of his family, went to the hospital and see him. And it was certainly a horrific set of injuries that he sustained. But could you imagine this world without such an articulate young man that just made this presentation if he didn't wear his seatbelt? And Secretary Costantino said earlier that there is more than one victim, and there are victims. And, his mom, Rhonda, whom I've known all of my life, has had to go through this terrible tragedy with him as a mother. And I think she'd rather have gone through this than have gone through having to bury her child without a seatbelt. And Nick, I'm very proud of you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Thank you. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. While the ACLU does not oppose in principle primary seatbelt legislation, a number of committee members are aware that for many years we have opposed consideration of primary seatbelt laws when not done in tandem with passage of anti-racial profiling legislation. I know a number of people say there's no connection, they should not be considered that way. But I can assure you there are many, many people in the minority community who feel very differently.